Ready? Yep, thanks. Welcome to today's meeting. This is a public meeting. Members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed once you have left the building. The assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Good evening. Item number 1, substantive substitutes.
Chair, we have no substitutes tonight.
That's fine. Item number 2, any declarations of interest? None recorded. I believe there's no public participation. Fine. And item number 4, minutes of the last meeting, please. Just go through page by page. Page 1. Page 2. And page 3. Thank you. That's agreed. And we have item number 5, income generation and income management. Mark?
Thank you, Chair. This report proposes revising the responsibilities for the committee and changing its title to be the Income Management Committee from Income Generation. The reasoning behind this is really that since the committee was set up originally, the landscape against which it is set has changed, particularly in that the rules that the council can borrow on have been revised by the PWLB loan board, that borrowing can only now be for activities that are not solely for the purposes of income generation. So you'll recall that as a council we bought 2 large property investments before the rules were changed, which have been successful investments for the council, but under the new revised regulations that's no longer possible. And so this paper sets out that the responsibilities for the committee just need to be flexed, to be revised, to be focused more on income management than solely on income generation. I don't propose to go through all the detail because it is quite a long report. But if you look at, for example, paragraph 3.3, that sets out that the reasons for borrowing that are acceptable are against service delivery. So when we're borrowing to buy assets that form part of the council's operations, for housing, which is interesting, so not necessarily part of the council's operations, but because it's part of the council's overall delivery, that is acceptable. Regeneration, which obviously the council is at the moment heavily engaged in through the Future High Streets Fund and the town's investment programme. Preventative action to stop either local companies or acquiring assets as a means of protecting jobs and so on, and then for treasury management. So those are all acceptable reasons for borrowing, but obviously don't include the borrowing purely for the purposes of income generation. And another example in 3.5 that works quite well, as you'd be aware, the council purchased the property in Foregate Street as part of the Arches project. That does generate an income which helps offset the cost of the borrowing, but the reason for that wasn't purely for income generation, but as part of progressing that project through being able to ultimately knock part of it down to open up that walkway down to the river. Similarly, in paragraph 3.6, the acquisition of Angel Place as part of future high streets, and so on. And then the tables really just set out the revised responsibilities. So in paragraph 4, 4.1, that just sets out as the bullet points, the various responsibilities that the committee would then have, which, as I say, are a flexing rather than a considerable change. I think that's probably a good overview. Has anybody got any particular questions?
Okay, I'm going to open up to the floor. Do we have any speakers on this item? Councillor Mitchell? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the logic of it. We wouldn't want to lose bids for terminology, and I get that. My no reservation. I hope that the committee, and for me, I'll still keep focused on identifying opportunities of where we can generate income for the city, because I don't just want it to become a signing off fees and charges, tick boxing committee. We were developed to try and solve a problem, and I don't see the problem's gone away. We still need to generate our own income, however that is, across the city. And I must admit, the way that I like the paper, the way it was laid out, and the description of where we can and can't spend money, or a general outline, and it sort of has directed my thinking to what do we lack as a city that we might need to go and invest in, that will generate us an income but will bring a bettering to the city. So like the swimming pool, we didn't build the swimming pool to make money, but we have to we make an income from that swimming pool by providing a facility that thousands of people benefit from. What else are we missing that we could do around that? And I haven't, we've been talking about it upstairs, an idea hasn't come to me other than, and I'm only thinking of my youth, a really big water park. And I don't mean one with 2 slides, I mean a proper water park that would make everyone in the county want to come here and forget Malvern. But that may not be it, that's just right. But that's the sort of thing. I don't know, it might be a skate park. What is it? But I don't think there's going to be much private money invested in those sorts of facilities for the city. But that's where I think we can potentially help. And that falls within the categories if you described it, loosely speaking. So, sorry, it was a bit of a ramble, but that's sort of where my thinking's going now. Chair, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mitchell. Do you know where the nearest indoor water park is? I did some research on that, actually, regarding and how much it actually cost to get in there. So I understand where the predicament, and actually locality-wise, we haven't got one in the West Midlands, have we?
Children love to swim. I was very fortunate. I was born by the sea. So I spent my, I mean, people wouldn't let their children do it now, but, you know, from 8 years old, I got my bike, rode to the beach when it got light, and I came home when, you know, we didn't have mobile phones, when it got dark, and, you know, and I spent all day at the beach, and I had my own water park, because we jumped off the piers and all the stuff like that. Well, children nowadays, I know it needs to be safer and a safer environment, but they don't have that. It's exactly what all children need to learn to swim, and they do that at school, but go and jump around and play and splash. We know how popular the splash pad is, let alone anything else. So, you know, what do teenagers do? Sorry, my rant wasn't fully over, was it? Still there.
Just picking up on some of those points without getting too distracted by a water park. I think if you reflect back in terms of what the council has done in the life of this committee, the big thing obviously we did with the property investment, which has been successful and generates an ongoing income for us. Unfortunately, that avenue is now closed. We've also seen good growth in existing services like trade waste and garden waste, both of which are producing record levels of income, which is really positive. And thinking of your water park example, We've also started work on regenerating assets with a view to long-term producing income, the classic example being the Scala Theatre, which is both fulfilling a need, a gap in the market, and will hopefully, provide a good service and facility for the city, but also produce an income as part of that. So I think those are good examples, and you're absolutely right. If we could identify other opportunities like that, then those are things that the council could still invest in. But as the chair says, you've got to have the space and opportunity to be able to do it.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chris touched on it just now when he said, you know, we daren't lose out on bids or whatever for fear of somebody just reading on a document, some minister reading on a document that we are purely an income generation committee, an idea or council. It's got to come from, it's got to be seen that we are actually managing and we're doing the right things to get that money into the city in the first place. But just expanding on Chris's idea, we don't have a monopoly on good ideas on this, either on this committee or the council or whatever, you know, and that whole idea about, you know, how we can improve the city or whatever, you know, it's not an unreasonable idea to say put something out in City Life or whatever, and saying to the people out there, you know, what do you want for your city, and let them come back to us and tell them, you know, and if you get enough saying the same one thing, and you've got, as Mark says, the space and the opportunity to do something, it might be something out there, you don't know, but just a thought.
Yeah.
My other idea, sorry, and I've banged on about this forever, and I'm probably getting more of a positive reaction from the other side of the table now. But actually, temporary accommodation. We put hundreds and hundreds of people in temporary accommodation, which costs us over £500,000 a year, every year. What can we do to make, it's not going to go away, but to make that temporary accommodation not some rubbish Airbnb somewhere, but that we provide, and we get some income out of it because the central government gives us, and you know what, it's going to take a big chunk of money, and I don't think there's anyone private landlord going to do it, so maybe that's where we think, or that's another area we think, so it's not all about jumping around in splash parks, but that's something else I think we could really look at, and would save us, if it saved us £500,000 a year, you wouldn't have to generate any income from it, because we're saving us £500,000 a year. Sorry, there.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what I've been beating on about for the last year and a half in terms of the local development company idea, in terms of actually the threefold win that we'd get in terms of increasing accommodation, increasing our social housing provision, saving on that benefit, and then reinvesting that money into our city. It's a no-brainer. Obviously, there's been some apprehension in terms of actually stepping from where we are to a fully fledged local development company, but actually there are JVMs, there are partners willing out there to work with us in terms of being able to achieve that have got the know-how, they've got the skills necessary that we can partner up, and that's part of the things hopefully Kevin and the team can pick up on as part of this ARC review and the final suggestions that come out of it, and you know, believe me, I'll be pushing for it. Councillor Stephen.
Just building on the point you've just been making, I mean, as you say, this has been talked about for years, probably 3 or 4 years at least, probably. And the whole time it sort of gets pushed away, it's like a mirage sort of thing. Is there a real active project that is actually looking at this? Or is this one of these things that's just sitting there hoping that someday somebody will have some resource to look at it? Because that surely is our remit, is to try to make a decision. We would like an officer to go away and find a way of doing it rather than find a way not to do it. Is there someone who's actually working on it or not?
If I may, Chair, I would want to split that into 2 parts. Is the council looking at ways to reduce the bottom line and improve the offer on temporary accommodation? Absolutely yes, and that's a function of the Communities Committee. And that is one of the reasons that the ARC work was commissioned. Is the council actively progressing a project to set up a company to do that? No. And one of the reasons for that is that that was one of the things that was addressed in the ARC review, which came to committee, and it wasn't recommended. So I'm being completely transparent with you. There isn't an active project to develop a development company.
Chair. So, and I know we developed the 8-bedroom place up on Bath Road, but that, for me, that's small thinking. I'm not thinking about 8 bedrooms. I'm thinking about 100 bedrooms or whatever. And maybe we go to someone who's a provider and say, we'll build it, we'll go and get the loan, we'll spend £15 million or whatever it costs. You go and run it for us and deliver it on our behalf. And that's where that's a sort of feasibility study that I'd really be looking at. And what officers have done is fantastic, and those temporary accommodations they found, particularly through COVID and whatever, was great. But I'm thinking more aspirational.
You're absolutely right, and actually there's probably better solutions than that. There's land that we own, that developers are actively looking to develop on. Well, you know, the land's in our ownership. You know, why aren't we going out and saying, well, hang on a second, you know, how do we fit in this? How do we make this happen? There are easier solutions out there.
But just to be clear, the ARC report gives us a really clear mandate to do joint venture activity, and officers support that, members support that. I think I'm just being really clear that one route is an arm's length development company. The report is unequivocal about that, at best, ambivalent. Doing joint ventures on individual sites to achieve, you know, a quantum, ideally being ambitious and doing larger sites, absolutely, we've got the appetite for that, absolutely. And those proposals will come forward primarily through the Communities Committee. But when this debate started, I was reflecting, I guess, with my governance hat on, about how the subcommittee supports the work of the other committees. And in some other places, this would be called a Finance and Development Committee, Income Gen, Income Management. This is the financial engine that should support and scrutinise proposals of other committees. So there should be, you know, if you like, a healthy degree of double handling between what the Communities Committee wants to look at from a policy objective and then this committee looking at it from a financial point of view. So I wouldn't want to suggest that work in relation to temporary accommodation is just going to go on somewhere else. It would very much be a double act between the two committees.
Just before you come in, Councillor Mitchell, I've had a live suggestion via Twitter from one of our followers who's watching online. Mark, thank you. And he suggests a possible entertainment arena near the Parkway, as the NEC isn't close for many. There's a practical suggestion. Thank you, Mark. Councillor Mitchell, Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that just suggests what I was saying before. Put it out there. Let's see what other people can actually come up with. But I think it's fair to make the point as well, though, that within that report, within that consultancy we had from ARC, they actually named other companies that would be willing or certainly seeking to work with us in relation to those developments. So the companies are out there. It's a question of us joining the dots, as it were.
Thank you. Do we have any more speakers on the item? No? Okay. So the recommendation is 1.1, that the subcommittee recommend to Council revised responsibilities of functions and revise its title to Income Management Committee. All those in favour?
Yes, that's carried, Chair.
Thank you. That's all agreed. Quarter 1 performance report, agenda item 6.
Thank you, Chair. This is the standard report that comes to this committee each quarter. So it sets out the various projects that the committee has oversight of, and then the KPIs that we regularly review. So I'll just run briefly through the various projects, and then we'll look at the KPIs. So first of all, the commercial strategy delivery. Some of this we've touched on already, but the acquisition of the properties under the various infrastructure projects are progressing, including the new levelling up bid that's being submitted. This includes the development of the grandstand at Pitchcroft, which, if successful, will generate income for both the landlord and the tenant under a surplus sharing arrangement with the council, of course, being the landlord. And similarly, the development refurbishment of the Nunnery Woods Sports Centre, which will help secure the contract with Freedom Leisure going forward. We also have the Shared Prosperity Fund, which will bring in just under £3 million over the next 3 years. Most of this is revenue funding. Some of that is committed to replace the ERDF grants, but some of it can also be used to support the existing costs, which will help address our budget challenges. And that was presented to the Place and Economic Development Committee only Monday night. Equally, another decision relating to the Arches contract was taken at Policy and Resources Committee last night. And this will have the potential to generate more income through the letting of 2 additional arches. And last but not least, as we've also just been talking about, there'll be a proposal relating to the acquisition of more affordable housing, and that'll be prepared and presented in due course. Final paragraph touches on, again, the report we've just been talking about in terms of refocusing some of the work and the attention of the committee. Moving on to income strategy, the report just notes the reduction we've had in some of the income streams because of the pandemic, and mainly in parking and leisure. It also notes the losses we're going to incur at the leisure centre because of the closure for the replacement of the floor tiles, and also that business rates income is coming under pressure because of the wider economic challenges, but the positive that we think that the resets of business rates will now not take place until 2024, which does secure the council's income from the business rates growth until that point. Sports facilities, as you'll all know, the hockey centre is now completed and up and running. We haven't yet received the request for the loan, but we expect that in the short term, and that will then generate a small income for the council. And as agreed at the last meeting, Communities Committee is now taking forward the work on the all-weather pitch at Purdiswell. And then, last but not least, there's the paragraph on the housing enabling strategy and the comments around the ARC report. Do we want to take any questions on those so far before we look at the KPIs?
Councillor Mackay.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick ones. Is there any further information at all on the proposal relating to the affordable housing acquisitions under consideration, or is that in its early stages and nothing more as yet?
I think unless Sian's got anything to add, I'm not aware of anything specific.
We're all playing pass the parcel, eyeball each other. There are a couple of small sites which are where negotiations are taking place, feasibility is carrying on. So there's nothing I can update, I don't think, in the public domain at the present time.
Thank you, Chair. And again, looks like I'm going to get a no on both of these, but the risk in Angel Place due to the partial building collapse, is there any update on that at all as to which way it's going, hopefully staying where it is.
That's referring to the Poundland building. So the work is progressing, building controls supervise in terms of the impact on, is it referred to as an impact on business rates? Yeah, so I mean, I think we've accommodated that based on the information we've had about how long that work is due to take place. We are kept updated by Crown Estates, so I'm not aware it's being flagged as any sort of enhanced risk at the moment.
Do we have any more speakers on this item? No. Just want to raise something actually Councillor Stephen raised with me prior to the meeting in terms of, I mean, it's partially relating something item in the previous item in terms of the scope of this committee in terms of, okay, income management, income saving, income scrutiny in terms of that. And part of what Councillor Stephen was saying, well, actually, is there an opportunity here in terms of the work that we're doing around freedom, around Purdiswell, and looking at cost-saving measures in terms of, you know, new ground horse heat source pumps or solar panels that can reduce the energy, improve the energy efficiencies and reduce the costs of electricity, hence maintaining the income, or if not, increasing the income that we, Freedom get, hence the income that we get.
I know we did look at the suggestion of photovoltaic panels on top of Purdiswell Leisure Centre not so long ago, about a year ago, and the report was fairly sort of inconclusive about any return on that. But I'll go and refresh my memory on that and bring that back. You'll recall that. Well, you may be aware that last week we took a proposal to Environment Committee to do a feasibility on 5 times the number of solar panels on top of St Martin's Gate car park, because at first sight there seemed to be a reasonable business case for that.
Okay, and the...
Can I just step in there as well? Coincidentally, we had a call with Freedom Leisure this morning and discussed the possibility in light of rising energy costs of solar panels. They were quite positive because they've already got other facilities that do that, and people in their team who can advise and support us on that. So they've taken that away as well to follow up with us. So it may well be that it's more of a viable proposition than it was a year ago.
Yeah, I'm keen to understand from why it wasn't. Councillor Stephen?
Just another thought that you might consider as well, looking at as well, is I've got a feeling that the heating for the pool is a combined heat and power system, I think they've got. And I'm just wondering, obviously the technology now is, there's a lot more moves to using things like heat pumps and so on. And there are obviously lots of developments going on in and around the site with things like the football pitches and things like that. And what I'd hate to happen is that we lock ourselves out of being able to do some sort of array of having a ground source heat pump in the future, because we didn't plan for it or allow for it in the future. So if we were to do some sort of assessment, even if we don't invest now, is to allow for it in the future, so that we could do this if we wanted to. Perhaps when the equipment that we've already paid for, we've probably got to sweat that out a bit more first, but to allow for it for the future, I think that would probably be quite prudent to do.
So I'll have to go away and refresh my memory, because I know that with Freedom Leisure we looked in at carbon saving and also energy saving measures at Purdiswell, which would include air source and ground source heat pumps, but at that stage it was just prohibitively kind of expensive, and whereas both parties would have been looking for a return, it wouldn't have been a justifiable.
But I suppose the landscape has now changed, hasn't it? So
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, could we have a report back at our next meeting, if that's possible? Yeah. Good. Thanks. And anything else on this item? No? Okay, well,
Should we move on to KPIs?
yes, please, yeah.
So if we move on to just briefly reviewing the income-related KPIs, I think the first one that's worth just drawing attention to is the Guildhall. So obviously because of the lockdown during pandemic, the income was considerably lower. That has picked up since then, although still remains below where we'd like it to be. Again, that was reviewed only this week, and there's some new proposals that, in terms of how we can improve the marketing and income from that. Trade waste, again, touched on earlier, one of the positive stories here. So the income is now with the university back, and the rugby club with now having crowds again, income's recording levels that higher than we've ever seen, which is really good. Still slightly below the budget. That's mainly because when we took the university contract on, obviously we work on estimated figures. So we'll be interested to see whether we can grow and achieve the budget. But I think the full year budget is 845,000, and the forecast we have at the moment for the year is 800. Which is very good, and considering where we were probably 3 or 4 years ago, that's considerable growth. Similarly with garden waste, probably one of the few good news stories to come out of the lockdown period we're under. Obviously people found it convenient to have their garden waste collected, and all the signs are that we're retaining those new accounts as people renew them, which is good. So it's exceeding the budget. As the note says, this is a 9% increase on the same period last year, given that the fees went up by only 2%. I think there's real growth there. Property, this covers all the council's investment properties, not just the two at the hospital. But obviously the income's achieving budget because it's a fairly predictable income stream. As the note says, that's the gross income that we received before the borrowing costs and so on.
Just a question on that. Where's the increase from 222 to 316?
Because as part of resetting the baseline, we've now included all the other properties. So previously we talked about this being the property investment fund and just measured the two major investments, but given those are now part of the main fund, and we know that we can't make any more acquisitions, then it seemed appropriate to bring all the others, so Carden Street and so on, into the mix. So apologies, the notes probably ought to explain that. Next is the single most important, of course, car park income. I think the green line really tells the story that back in the end of 2021, income had dropped to its very low levels of only 166,000 for a whole quarter. Since then, we've seen a steady increase, and we're now at a fairly interesting point where we've consistently had for the last few months income at 90% of budget, and budget is the average of the 3 years pre the pandemic. So we're only 10% short of where we were. Having said that, 10% on an income stream of £3.5 million is still £350,000. So it's a significant amount of money. I don't want to prejudge and one swallow become a summer or whatever the expression is, but income for the month of June was better than it was in April and May, so we were up at 95%. Remains to be seen whether that's something that's going to continue, but it could just be that we're starting to get closer to where we really want to be. Anecdotally, when I come and park, as I did today, the car parks seem busy to me, busier than they were 2 or 3 months ago. So we will see, but I think the there could be the classic green shoots. Bereavement income, this is the slightly different story that income has stabilised now that we've come out of the pandemic. But even though we've reduced the budget down from where we were before the opening of the new crematorium at Fladbury, we are still falling short of that budget by around 10 or 15%. Planning income through development management. This is always a difficult one to forecast and to comment on, because it can be distorted by how many larger applications we have. But it's showing a fairly consistent trend, albeit in the first quarter of this year it has been lower than it was for the previous 3 quarters. And then we have the neighbourhood income, which is what we generate mainly from work we do for the county council. The drop we've had here is mainly due to the rescoping of work we receive from them. So the work for jetting has now transferred over to another of their providers, and that's reduced us just down to the transportation of the street sweepings. But as part of that, we reduced the cost that we needed to support that, so it hasn't been a complete loss to us. And that's it for the KPIs. If anybody has any questions.
No questions? Okay, and then we'll, 1.1 is for the Income Generation Subcommittee. Notes that the Council Quarter 1 performance for 22-23. Noted. Thank you. Electric vehicle charging prices.
Thank you.
Kevin?
As you probably know, we have 9 electrical vehicle charging points at St Martin's Gate, which were installed last year, and we're the beneficiaries of the income after paying a management fee. Obviously, we're responsible for the paying for the servicing and maintenance of them. Policy and Resources Committee resolved that the rate for using these should be set at market rates, and the current charge is 30p per kilowatt hour, whether that's used on whether you use one of the slower chargers or the fast chargers. So that's 30p per kilowatt hour. The break, because our electricity increased, the price that we pay for our electricity has naturally risen, and the break-even point is actually around 36p per kilowatt hour. But by reference to the kind of market rates and the going rates, those are between 45 and 57p per kilowatt hour for the faster chargers at the moment. If you want to use the faster charger at Waitrose or at the Crown Gate, Asda, at the university, you're going to be paying 56p per kilowatt hour. I think if you leave it at Tesco's, probably paying 28p an hour. So the recommendation is to reset our charges to a more market-facing figure at 39p per kilowatt hour for the slower charges and 49p per kilowatt hour for the fast 1 hour charges, and that should mean not just that we're in line with kind of other market rates, but we're moving from covering the cost of service provision into making a small surplus as well.
Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Stephen.
Thanks very much, Kevin. For me, there's a couple of things missing from this. All 4 electric vehicle charging points, and I know in 10 years' time, all of our spaces, or 20 years' time, they're all going to be EV. Where I think we're missing something here is we need to know, so we were making X pounds a year per parking space. whilst I know we want to be encouraging people to use the EV charging points, parking is one of our greatest incomes. So we need to be setting that rate such that we're making an income. And I understand we're on a learning curve, but so for me, this isn't showing me what margin we're making on that parking space on an average usage. And I think if we don't understand that detail, we're not going to understand how we move to all of our parking spaces being, because we'll either be way behind and have to suddenly throw prices up, or hopefully not vice versa, that we've been overcharging people. So I just think there's a bit more work for me to do, for me to be able to sit here and say, because we're not charging them for actually parking there. So what happens if someone goes in there, plugs in, takes an hour's worth of parking, and then doesn't move for the rest of the day? He's only paying 90p, or 30p, or whatever. Sorry, lots of questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether I've got all the answers, but yeah, you're paying, if you're using a fast charger, it's true, you're not paying for the car parking space, but if you're in there for 4 hours using the slower charger, then you are required to pay for the parking. And I think if you're in a fast parking space and you kind of go beyond your welcome, so to speak, then obviously the civil enforcement officers will pick you up and fine you on that basis. So I think these spaces are policed. So I think there'd be reasonable expectation that we are getting our money for the use of the car parking spaces.
But it doesn't. I don't expect the answer now, but I'd like that we do some more work so we understand if we fix the price that you're asking us to fix it is, what is my profit margin on that, and what does that relate to in terms of what I would have earned as a parking space, and if it might demonstrate that actually we're earning 20% less, but of course on £3 million a year parking, that's £600,000 a year less revenue we're suddenly earning, or we might be making 20% more, which I don't think we should be, but so that would just be useful. I don't expect an answer now, but I think that's where we should be heading, I guess.
Mark, I'll bring you in.
I think you raise a really good point. The bit I'd probably add is that for the current position we're in, we've only got a relatively small number of spaces, and if that means that someone's parking one of those and that's stopping someone else parking there, then they'll simply have to park one floor higher up in the empty spaces than they would otherwise. So that means that we're not losing that income. But you're absolutely right. If we end up with 100 spaces with charges in, then yes, at that point we'll need to be sure that we've got the sums right.
And that sort of goes to my next question: was when are we putting more in? Because we've got a handful. Why haven't we got 100? Because the infrastructure's in now. I know that was the big cost driver for putting these in. So when are we putting the next 20 in, the next 30 in?
I think, yeah.
Who's going to go? Obviously, in the capital programme, there is £200,000 for new electrical vehicle charging points at town centre car parks. Again, I'm not sure whether we've, at this stage, identified which car parks those spaces will go, and obviously we have to see how far 200k will go before coming back to perhaps put more in St Martin's Gate, if the intention is to kind of roll those car parking, those charging units out to car parks where they don't exist at the moment.
Chair, sorry, I hate to keep coming back, but it was £440,000, if my memory is correct, to put these ones in. And when we challenged, or when I challenged that, I said, blimey, now that sounds expensive. The cost driver was putting the infrastructure, getting the cable across the road. So we've now spent on that infrastructure. Let's grow that site, because people who got an electric car will go to where the electric charging point is for a necessity, because otherwise they can't go any further. And I'm not saying we put 1,000 in there now or 300, but let's use that 200 grand now while we work out where the next parking space is that might be more convenient for people with electric cars and closer. But I get I'll be honest, I get frustrated when we say we've got £200,000 in the capital programme. Brilliant. I want to know when the capital programme's going to happen, not that we got 200 grand in there.
And I see exactly your point, because obviously that £200,000, probably a third will go on consultancy fees of where it needs to go. A third it will be on groundwork costs, and by the time you actually put somebody in, you'll probably get 6 or 7. Actually, if you've done all the donkey work, you've done the hard work, the economies of scales are simply say, actually develop St Martin's Gate. Councillor Stephen.
Yeah, I'd like to support this recommendation. You might expect a Green Party person to say you want this free, you want it to be cheap, you want to encourage more electric chargers. But the fact is that unless we charge at least what it costs and a market rate, we're never going to be able to afford to pay for more EV charging points. We're never going to be able to justify all the solar panels we want to put in. We need to be able to make this a business as well. So we've got to recirculate that money. We've got to make this into a business opportunity as well as all the good things we want from the EVs as well. So it is obviously lower cost than the actual cost of the electricity. We are actually paying them to do this, to charge at the moment. It's crazy. I know it's because of the cost of electricity. So yeah, it gets my support, and you might expect me to be arguing against it, but I'm very much in favour.
Thanks, Councillor Stephen. I mean, one of my questions, go on. I said one of my questions was actually, since the energy hikes, how much are we losing out of it, or how much have we lost in terms of that? That's the first question. I'll come back on another one.
Okay, as I say, 36p is a break-even point. So if we don't increase, then we're probably on target to lose as much as 12,000.
Then the second question is, obviously there's another price hike coming around in October. What saves us coming back here in October to discuss a change in prices again?
Obviously, everyone's got October in mind because that is when the cap for domestic tariffs will go higher. Obviously, we procure our electricity in a different way. Our kind of financial year, our pricing year is from April to April, and there's no cap on what we pay, but on the other hand, the way we've procured our energy has to date protected us from the sorts of increases that you and I might face at home. That's not to say that, our increase next year is going to be, a lot higher than the 22% that we faced this year. But it's just to sort of make the point that we pay and procure our electricity in a different way than we will pay and procure our electricity at home. So.
Understood. But then is there an argument for us to say, actually, let's set a rate of what our rate should be above the price that we pay it for, and set that, and then just carry on ad infinitum on that basis?
I think there's a case for saying the report that we will monitor the way our pricing goes, and come back and suggest any revised pricing that is appropriate, and also have regard to the way other providers of charging points are charging for the use of their facilities. The Policy and Resources Committee has very much said that we're trying to set a market tariff for this. So first and foremost, it's the evidence of what else is being charged in the market. Want to be sure that we remain competitive and that our facilities are used, but obviously, second, to make sure that we're not paying for other people to use them.
Thanks, Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Steve.
I think the other point that's important is that we don't want to undermine the market as well. If we're seriously undercharging, then other providers, private providers, won't then invest, because why would they? Because we're going to upset the market. So that's another very good reason to make sure we go for a market price.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I don't know if you're aware, the email that came from Mr. Flynn Shane this afternoon, that goes some way in answering the way forward in relation to how we can ensure that we keep in line with the cost.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. We're going to cover that in any other business. Is that okay? Jill?
Thank you, Chair. So all the provision at the moment is City Council owned, is that right, for the electric charging points? Is that correct?
Yes, it's City Council owned.
Is there any plan to work in partnership with the housing providers to get some facilities in their areas? Or is that something that City Council could work on anyway if they sort of have adopted the street?
In terms of kind of provision of on-street charging, because we're a two-tier authority, that's the county council to lead forward on a electrical vehicle charging policy. Our focus is very much on land and facilities that we own in the city centre, i.e. the car parks.
So no, then it's county council or yeah, okay.
Kevin?
Something I wanted to kind of assure Councillor Mitchell on, that this is a project that my team are very much moving on already, in conjunction with the sustainability officer. And also we've used the learning that we gained from putting these in at St Martin's Gate, where we did employ a consultant, but we've used the learning on that, and we've decided that we can do this very much in-house.
I'm really glad you said that, actually. We've learnt off a consultant and learnt in-house how to do something, so that's a great skill to have. Thanks. Any other points on this? Good. We'll go to the recommendations. There's one recommendation, 1.1, that the subcommittee recommends the charges proposed within this report to Council for approval. All those in favour?
Yes.
It's unanimous. Thank you. We have one item of any other business. Mark?
Yes, thank you, Chair. At the Policy and Resources Committee meeting last night, there was a discussion around the Council's process for amending fees and charges during the year. The current policy is that any changes to fees and charges have to first go through committee approval and then on to full council for all members to vote on them. The exception to that is that if the change will produce income of less than £5,000 a year, then it doesn't need that approval and can be made by officers. The point was made last night that in the current economic climate, our approach may well work when inflation is low and stable, but with inflation currently at a much higher level and forecast, if anything, to increase, then only doing an annual review means the council is somewhat tied in terms of how it can operate. And whilst we can make those small changes, an income of only £5,000 isn't a lot for changes that might be made. So Shane Flynn, Director of Finance and Resources, has suggested on the back of that we amend that £5,000 limit to £10,000, which then increases the scope for those in-year amendments without having to go through the said approval process. The suggestion is that the committee might want to consider that now, and then if approved it could go forward to Policy and Resources and then on to Council for approval.
Just to clarify the governance around that, a change in the delegation would be for full council to approve. So we don't need an agenda item on this tonight, but we will need a paper on it before it goes up to full council. So if Income Gen tonight by all means want to discuss the principle, then that recommendation either way can make its way into your minutes. We can make sure it's on the next P&R committee, which is 6th of September, so that if if you did want to recommend a change, and that's what P&R agreed to do, then that will make its way onto full council agenda for 20th September. And the other point just to make is they're like buses, aren't they? Full council meetings. So we're going to have 20th September, 17th of October, which is a special council meeting to look at SWDP, but we could have a fees and charges item if we needed. And then we've got also a November council meeting. So I just wanted to give members comfort that there is some scheduled time in the autumn if fees and charges need looking at again in light of changes in terms of cost and living and energy.
Yeah, happy to put that out to the floor. Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, as your Vice Chair, I would sort of recommend to this committee that that is something that we do actually take on board and do recommend. I think it's a fail-safe for the future. We don't want to be running at any losses like Kevin sort of mentioned already. If prices do change to the extent whereby we're that concerned, where we keep coming back to committee or looking at the same problem over and over, it would only be deferred for another length of time, considerable time probably, before we could make those changes. So the recommendation now would avoid all that, to delegate it to officers. So yeah, as I say, I think it's a wise decision to move forward in this way.
So, yeah, thank you. Very wise words, Councillor Mackay. Any other speakers on it? Okay, fine. I mean, my only question was the 10,000 limit. Is that flexible enough?
There's no easy answer to that. Obviously, £10,000 is still a relatively small amount, depending on which particular area of service we're talking about. So, for the EV chargers, that's still quite a lot, because that's a fairly small scale operation at the moment. If we were talking about something that's bigger, for example, garden waste collection, then £10,000 would make no difference at all. So I think there's obviously the option to set a higher limit, but Sian has a view from a governance point of view, but it's really how much control over it you want.
Only to add, as I said before, that there are obviously always a number of full council meetings in the diary. So if we just need to get into the rhythm of reviewing this more regularly at full council, then we can. We're blessed by frequency of meetings, aren't we? We can use them more often, and your committee can convene more regularly or in the margins of another meeting if you want to have a special item on this. So don't think that increasing the financial delegation to 10k is the only flexibility we can apply. We can always pop this on other agendas and keep it in view.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's probably eminently sensible in terms of where we are, and if other committees come back and say that isn't enough, and we could always change it, can't we? So, I mean, as a recommendation from this committee, all those in favour of it?
Yes.
Great, fine. Thank you. Thank you for attending. Appreciate it.
Chair, apologies, on my alarm went off and then I thought I'd turned it off and then it went to snooze. My wife